So as Sean Spicer and the administration shift the focus, from their perspective, I suppose, to the fact that they believe that the Trump administration was wiretapped, and then the press, the media, and others are certainly looking, and quite frankly, the House and the Senate committees are looking at whether there were some Russian breaches here. Is this controversy overwhelming the White House's ability to make progress on the issues that many of, certainly of our viewers, what they care about, and that's health care and tax reform? Can President Trump keep his focus on policy, as he seems to be doing with this afternoon's executive orders on trade coming, as we understand it, in about 25 minutes? We're joined by Democratic strategist Richard Goodstein and Fox News contributor and columnist Deroy Murdock. Deroy, look, especially when he had said on Meet the Press, and when I say he, I mean Michael Flynn, the former NSA director, that anybody who seeks and gets of course, when you get that immunity, then you're guilty of something. Now people are looking at that. So even as Sean Spicer says, nothing to see here, folks, except that the president was a victim of wiretapping. Can he really keep that narrative up?
I think he can, and we're hearing more and more every day things that seem suspicious. This woman, Ms. Farkas, who's popped up overnight, named a new member of the cast of this interesting drama. It seems that she and some of her colleagues were taking intelligence and spreading it around the bureaucracy, trying to make sure that it, I guess, existed after the Trump administration came in. So we're learning more about that, and I think the president ultimately will be vindicated. There was some sort of surveillance. I don't think we're near the bottom of this, but we need to keep digging. And if it turns out that the Obama administration, in fact, spied on either the Trump transition team or the Trump campaign, then we've got ourselves a massive, horrific political scandal.
Well, yeah, you know, I think that's as we wait, what some people are anticipating. Richard, today, Sean Spicer, the minute he was asked about Russia, turned to written pages and brought up Hillary and Bill Clinton. What did you make of that?
This is a misdirection of the first order of historic proportions. Dick Cheney said that the Russian hacking of the U.S. election was an act of war. Every 17 intelligence agencies said the Russians subverted the U.S. democracy. Every single authority in the national security field, Comey, the director of national intelligence, said that what Donald Trump treated was a fiction. And they are desperate to avoid having authorities with real influence and independence look at what exactly the Russians did and who, if anybody, in the Trump orbit. It doesn't have to be technically the Trump campaign. We're all in quotes now, right? We don't actually talk about wiretapping. It's like whatever you want it to mean. Whoever from the Trump orbit was dealing with the Russians, which is why an hour after the Access Hollywood tape dropped, the first WikiLeaks of John Podesta came down. Is that a coincidence?
Wait, now you're bringing up the Access Hollywood tape. I need to bring up Rex Tillerson, Deroy, and this all comes together as we continue to ask this question: can the president still continue to focus on things that really matter to a lot of Americans? And that is that Rex Tillerson, at a lunchtime meeting at NATO, said we need to keep NATO unified in dealing with President Vladimir Putin of Russia. So the Russia issue seems to be, at least on behalf of many of the president's cabinet members, and we could go on and on with some of these, and Mattis, Nikki Haley, we'll talk a little bit about that later. Now we need to hear about tax reform, and we're not. When will we?
Look, I think the President of the United States defines what's in the news. He can get up and give a speech about anything he wants. He can go to the Chamber of Commerce or go to a factory, go to an H&R Block and talk about the complexity, the numbing complexity of the U.S. tax code and get the press to focus on that. Unfortunately, I think he's been on the defensive on the Russia issue. One of the things I think the GOP ought to do, and some of these investigators ought to do, is not just chase the theory of some collusion between Russia and the Trump campaign, the possibility that may have happened, but instead look at what we know did happen. For example, the fact that Secretary of State Hillary Clinton approved a deal that allowed Russia to get control of 20% of U.S. uranium production. And in exchange for that, investors in a company called Uranium One put $165 million into the Clinton Foundation. Now, that doesn't seem to me to be a theory of collusion between the U.S. government and Russia, but a reality. And that's very, very disturbing, and we need to get to the bottom of that.
As part of the swamp. But Richard, it's a distraction nonetheless. And I understand that it matters, But when will we see Democrats work with Republicans on health care, tax reform, infrastructure?
Yeah. First of all, what Deroy just said is an utter fiction, and it speaks to how
no,
weak...
it actually took place.
It is, Deroy.
It actually took place.
It speaks to how weak the Trump case is, that people have to come back to something that everybody who's looked at it knows is a fiction, that Hillary had nothing to do with it, and that the State Department
was a decision
one
on her
of a
desk.
dozen
She had to make a
agencies.
decision about this.
Distracted.
Okay. Now,
what about
Liz,
tax reform, and will Democrats work? Hey, could they even work with the Freedom Caucus, who's being embattled by the president right now?
And I think what it's going to take, look, Trump's at historically low approval ratings. This debacle around health care did not help him. This Russia thing is not helping him. He needs Democrats. And what did he just tweet out? We need to take on the Freedom Caucus and Democrats, and Schumer's a clown. That's not exactly the way to reach out to Democrats. I think there's a deal to be made on infrastructure and tax together. I really do. But certainly from the messages coming from the White House, you would have no indication of that.
If I were Donald Trump, what I would do is send the Freedom Caucus and the moderates and so on to Camp David and have them go there and try to work out a deal. I think they came close. I think they can maybe put a deal together there and let him enjoy Camp David. Between April 1 and April 15, focus on taxes, which is what Americans will be doing.
Let me tell you, the president doesn't like Camp David. Word is he thinks it's
He can send them there. They can have a
good
good time and come up with a deal at Camp David
while he
stays.
both.